So, just like, so many eye things that never work. So I'm going to do it really fast, but I want you to think about just like how you would explain it when you only had a short amount of time. And then also you'll see the recording here and then the podcast, we talked through it. So the SWOT is a tool that's used actually often in business settings. And what I think is so cool to do is to say, okay, we're people who sometimes we are using the SWOT for our business. Sometimes we are using it for a sense of understanding, profits and those kinds of things. But also, what does it look like to SWOT out our leadership and maybe even our personal life? And we get this concept from 3D Movements, where Mike Breen and the team took the SWOT, which is not theirs, but took it and kind of gave their own version of it. And then I think Joe and I now we kind of have our own version of it too. So we're just going to give credit to all the people that aren't us, whoever they are. But it's been such a helpful tool for us, so we want to share it in that way. So pretty simply, it starts with a quadrant. And the reason it's called a SWOT is because of the word strength, W, weakness, and then opportunity for the O, and then threat. Now, if you've done this with us before, you know that these are actually not the 4 words that we really focus on, but that's why it's called a SWOT. And we want to focus on these different words that emerge when you see a combination of these other things, which is what you kind of have going with the axis. And so when you find an experience where there's a weakness, and notice I always forget which one's X and which one's Y. Horizontal, the horizontal axis is internal. It's weakness, strength, it's your own capacity. The vertical one is external. So there's opportunities that are external and there's external threats. So when there's an internal weakness that you have and an external threat, what we often see is that we end up with failure. Failures are usually scary words. Most people don't like that word, but it can be really helpful and healthy to name a failure when there is one, because it's from there that you're able to move forward and be able to step into what needs to happen next. If you find yourself in a spot where there's a strength, so an internal strength, but there's an external threat, then this is going to be something that feels like a battle. Thinking battle of there's something external that you're battling against, not an internal battle. That's an important thing to pay attention to in this specific example. And so then when there's an opportunity, doesn't even look like I wrote that word, opportunity. When there's an opportunity that's external, but there's an internal weakness that you have, think about that for a moment. That would feel very frustrating. We say frustration. But if you were to find yourself in an opportunity that is external and there's plenty of opportunity and you also have a strength that allows you to engage that opportunity, you're going to experience a breakthrough. Although we should also pay attention that this word is in there, which means sometimes breakthroughs are hard to notice at first because something might have really broken, like you might have really stepped into something. So when we talk about this, you can easily give some different examples. My favorite one to give, because I've got some experience in real estate, is thinking about the fact that if you were to have the internal strength and weakness when it comes to something like wanting to buy a house, if you were to have, for instance, if you were to have no money saved, and there's also no opportunity because no houses are on the market right now, that would be a fail. You're not buying a house. If you were to have saved all this money and you're so ready, and at least in Minneapolis this is the case, and the houses are flying off the market, you can barely have a chance to put a down payment on one. That's an external thing. You saved the money, you're ready to go, but there's not enough houses, and so that's going to be a battle. You did what you could, but there's not houses ready to go. If you did not save, but oh my goodness, it's 2007 or whatever the year that was, there's a ton of houses and they're on a great deal, and you didn't save the money, so you're not ready to put a down payment on, that would be very frustrating because you would not be able to step into that reality. And then if you were to be 2009, 2008, whenever that was, and you had saved and you're ready to go, and there's more houses than you could possibly even look at that are for sale and they're a good deal, that would be for you a breakthrough, because you're going to get a house, not only a good one, but maybe even one that really fits you perfectly at the rate that you'd hope to pay. I know that's very practical, but I think for me, it helps to think that practically before I move into something more specific. So then finally, let me just give one more tool. when we think about how we move into breakthrough, because of course we want to have breakthrough in our life, there's a few different things to think about. If you were to use this in a business standpoint, we would really focus probably on the ways in which me, you, our leaders, our people, our organization can get better, can do better. But as people of faith, we want to stop and say, wait a second, when we use this kind of tool as a diagnostic, and we're thinking about how we want to get to breakthrough, we need to not say, how do we add God to that, but actually, what is God's invitation in that, and how do we respond to that? And so when there is a failure and God is inviting us into something, I mean, I think the biblical narrative would make it clear that what's happening whenever there's a fail, something's died, something needs to be grieved. The invitation, yeah, sure, is maybe grief, but ultimately, to get to breakthrough, it's a sense of trusting in resurrection. That's who God is, that there's beauty that comes from ashes. And so that is something that can help us maybe not move right to breakthrough, but out of failure at least. If you're in a battle, this is external. This is not something that is internal to you. And so we know that what God invites us to do is to stand firm, right? And what we need to do is increase our faith that God fights for us. So an increase of faith is what can help us get to breakthrough. If we're feeling frustrated and we've been able to name that this is an internal weakness, I don't know about you guys, but I have a hard time sometimes knowing, is this a battle or a frustration? That's normal. We'll talk about that. If you find yourself realizing this is a frustration because there's something in me that I need to grow in that's causing this reality, man, we're so quick to jump to shame. We're quick to jump to to-dos and shoulds. But what if we were to stop and say, if God's inviting us to pay attention to a weakness, perhaps the first thing we need to do is to receive more of God's grace in our life so that God can lead us towards the place that God wants us to be. So perhaps grace is what helps us get to a breakthrough from here. And then as Joe and I talk about breakthrough, I remember we did a whole podcast on this once, Joe. We should do that, talk about this a little bit more. But what do you do once that's there? Because it's not just like, oh, finally we made it. It's the end of the marathon. And it's not a marathon. It's now you have a breakthrough in an area of life. How are you going to be a good steward of that? What are you going to do to continue to invest that? Oftentimes you think of something like a bunch of fruit has grown in an orchard. And now do you have the people to help get those apples off there before they go bad? Like there's sometimes those types of realities. So what we often talk about here is that what we need is an increase of wisdom in our lives, the plus sign. We need wisdom in our lives to respond to the breakthrough and to be good stewards of what God's done in that reality and good stewards of the effort that we've put in and the fruit that we might be seeing too. So anything you'd add, Joe, before we open up for some questions? No, no. Okay. Let's do some Q&A.